You are now on YouTube and you're recording.
Okay. Well, thank you all for being here for the City of Philomath's June 27th, 2022's City Council meeting. First, we will get started with a roll call.
1 moment. Ruth Causey. Here. Matt Lehman.
Here.
David Lowe.
Here.
Teresa Nielsen. Here. Catherine Visco. And Jessica Andrade.
Present.
And Chaz Jones.
Here. Excellent. Again, thank you all for being here. First, I'm just going to kind of summarize what we're going to be discussing tonight. Tonight we have a public hearing on the Comprehensive Plan, Chapter 3, on the topic of housing policies. We will then have public comments on our unfinished and proposed business. We then will be going through our unfinished business, which includes both the discussion of the North 11th Street Local Improvement District and a neighborhood traffic management plan. Then we'll have a reading of Ordinance 865 on the Transient Lodging Tax. And with that, we will be concluding our meeting. So first, we will go ahead and open a public hearing for the Comprehensive Plan, Chapter 3, on the housing policies. So first, the title is Amendments to the Comprehensive Plan, Chapter 3, Housing. And first, in terms of the public hearing, we will first have a staff report, and then we will have a public testimony, council questions of staff, followed by council deliberations, and then a final decision. For anybody testifying this evening, please keep our comments to 3 minutes. And if anyone wishes to keep the hearing open, requires that someone request that orally or in writing. And then those requests should be stated in the testimony. How's that sound?
That sounds good.
Okay. So with that, the public hearing is now open. And Chris, do you want to give a staff report?
I'd be happy to. So the staff report was located in your council packet for this evening's meeting. And for an update to the comprehensive plan, the staff report primarily looking at the process that is required by our own statute, state law, planning goals, procedures, and just making sure that we are compliant and following those. A little bit of background information is provided on what initiated this process. As you recall, the housing needs analysis that was completed here a year and a half ago. And then the Planning Commission started looking at these recommended policies. They looked at policies from other cities, similar in size or in region, and had quite a few discussions to kind of narrow those policies down to what's before you now. They've packaged those together and felt pretty good about what the work that took place there. As far as findings go, this is coming out of section 18-105-60 in the municipal code, as this is a type 4 legislative hearing process. So it's clearly legislative. There's no quasi-judicial amount here. So this is going to be broad in scope, covering everything. The first finding is that the pre-application meeting was held. When the city is the applicant, we don't typically hold a meeting with ourselves. We just move forward with the application process and waive those application fees and everything else, just because, again, it's staff that's working on those. We do provide public notice, though, and I'll note, just start on the bottom of page 1. Notice of the first public hearing at the Planning Commission on May 16th was provided, including a list of interested parties in accordance with our code requirements. Notice was delivered to the Department of Land Use Conservation Development. Notice of the hearings was published in the Gazette Times. And Copies of all the documents were posted on the city's website. Notice of the public hearings, both the planning commission and this evening, posted on the May and the June city newsletters. And notice of the public hearings was provided on 9 different editions of the city's weekly email notice that the city recorder puts out. So I feel like we've done a good job of getting notice out about these hearings and making sure anybody who had any interest at all knew that this was happening and could be here to testify. As far as decision-making criteria, the criteria for the council this evening is going to be based on the following. First and foremost is statewide planning goals and guidelines. And we looked at ORS 197-610 for some, which is what requires us to submit any changes to the Department of Land Conservation Development. We did submit those on April 7th. All the documents were submitted and put before them for review. We had an opportunity to receive any comments and did not receive any comments from DLCD on these amendments. The second finding is second finding is that the proposed housing policies for the Philomath Comprehensive Plan comply with the state planning goals requirements for housing. Amendments to Chapter 3 of the Comprehensive Plan are provided in Exhibit A of the staff report, which would be the primary point of discussion later this evening following the hearing. Again, provided comments and haven't received any feedback from DLCD. We're also required to provide notice to any, or to look at any intergovernmental agreements, short of the kind of urban fringe agreement with Benton County that deals more with the industrial areas and commercial areas in the fringe, some on the housing and just who has jurisdiction over development permits. Didn't find that there were any other intergovernmental agreements that really would be affected by these recommended changes. And then lastly, applicable comprehensive plan policies, provisions of the code that implement comprehensive plan. So we look at the code itself, or the comprehensive plan itself, and look at the sections that apply. First and foremost is our public engagement section of the code, which just recently got updated. And so just a quick review of that. Again, giving public notice, holding the public hearings. This is the process that the comprehensive plan lays out for making sure that we have citizen involvement in land use decisions and changes in land use policies. So that was carried out. All the comprehensive plan map or text amendments taking place within our hearing process, and the city council, planning commission, and now the city council are holding these public hearings. So we found that the city is following our public hearing process in considering these amendments, including first reviewing the amendments at the planning commission level and forwarding the recommendations from the commission to the city council. In conclusion, proposed amendments to Chapter 3, housing of the Philomath Comprehensive Plan, meet the criteria set by Philomath Municipal Code, Oregon State Statute, and the comprehensive plan itself. With that, I will conclude my report.
Thank you. So first, does any councilor wish to declare any potential or actual conflicts of interest? Okay. Seeing none, are there any objections on jurisdictional grounds, which means that the city council is not the appropriate body for this hearing? Seeing none. Okay. So land use decisions such as this case under consideration this evening are evaluated against the applicable statewide planning goals and guidelines and criteria from the Land Development Code and Comprehensive Plan as presented in the staff report. So we just had the staff report, and are there any preliminary questions of staff at this time? There will be an opportunity to ask additional questions after the public testimony. Okay, seeing none, city attorney.
As people come to testify tonight, this is a good time to remind people that they should direct their testimony towards the applicable criteria as just discussed in the staff report, or other criteria in the municipal code, comprehensive plan, or land development code, which they believe applies to these amendments. Because failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the city or other parties the opportunity to respond to that issue precludes appeal to the State Land Use Board of Appeals based on that issue. So if someone has a problem, time and place to bring it up, or you may not be able to later. Thank you.
Thank you. So we will now move to public testimony. Before you make your comments, please sign in with your name and address. Please keep your comments to 3 minutes and provide any written materials that you wish to be a part of the official record to the recording secretary. Does anyone wish to speak regarding this application?
I have not received any requests to speak on the public hearing.
Okay. So seeing none there.
Which means we don't have any requests to keep it open or.
So now is appropriate time. So the public hearing is now closed. And does any city councilor have any further questions of staff? Councilor.
Someone's got to ask, maybe. So I was just looking at housing goals and policies, goal 1 later. So on page 3 of 4, number 1 and number 2, line number 1. So allow for and encourage a wide range of housing development. So I guess I'm just wondering about the word encourage. How does that work, or how would we do that? I mean, is that something we really need to nail down now, what encourage means, or can you give some idea of how we do it?
Yeah, there's a couple ways I can see encourage. It is broad and intentionally, it's at the policy level. You could encourage wide range of housing development by looking at your zoning requirements, looking at allowed uses and different types of the different zones that the city has established already. Looking at things, some of the conversation the planning commission had were looking at some higher density housing uses that our code doesn't speak to, like housing cottages, cottage clusters, tiny homes. There's a whole array of kind of not necessarily new housing, but it's new in the sense that our code doesn't refer to it. And so I think there would be some encouragement to look at our code and look for opportunities where we can widen the definition of housing from just single family, duplex, triplex, multifamily. So that would be one way to encourage it. The other that you could interpret from that would be, providing some type of incentives for different types of housing. So if we wanted, say, higher density housing, is there some financial incentive that the city could provide to do that? That would be an appropriate measure that would be reflected in this policy as well.
And is that something, so to do all of that, is that something you bring to the council to say, hey, this is, we want to do this, or is it, or how, I guess I'm just like, practically speaking, how do we get there? So yes, we want cottage style housing, we want all sorts of different mixes. Zoning code, I know we've made some changes, but how do we actually stimulate that?
So once the policy is adopted, then it'll go back to the planning commission, and it can go back with specific direction from the council, or it'll just go back anyway, because we'll be looking at our housing development code and looking at how our current code is or is not reflected by these new policies. And so we'll be coming back to the planning commission. We'll be going through all of this. Staff will have recommendations. I know the planning commission itself has some recommendations. Councilor Causey serves on there as the liaison. I know she, has an ear to the council and what things have been discussed at the council level, and we'll be bringing topics up. But if the council has something specific, you can always give specific direction to the planning commission to look at that code language. The incentive side, the planning commission is not typically going to get involved in that. That'd be more through maybe our strategic planning process, and looking that way.
Okay. Yeah. So goal 3 itself looks like it's much more specific with all of its policies here as to what kind of rounding out what we're envisioning housing could be in the city, which I think is good. I think it's going to challenge, maybe challenge some residents in terms of how we've looked at housing in the past, just single family, single lot kind of housing that might pose some difficulties with with that, moving in that direction as opposed to how we have done it. Also had a question on goal 4, it talks about sustainable housing. In some ways, it seems that that could be at odds with goal 3, only in terms of the expense. I mean, I may be wrong, but it seems that sustainable housing usually has greater expense attached to it maybe than more traditional type of thing. And to have affordable housing, you have to cut expense. So basically somebody has to subsidize it.
Yeah, and I don't know that it's either or. I think you can provide both opportunities for affordable housing, and at the same time, you can provide more opportunities, incentives for more sustainable housing. I think the strongest advocates will tell you can do both at the same time if you're intentional. But even if you can't cover both, you can still, if you can't do both in the same project, you can do multiple projects and they're going to cover different aspects of it.
But it does take incentives in our part. It's not that somebody can just come in and apply for a mortgage and say, I'm going to buy this because, their income level just doesn't allow them to. So I guess what I'm getting at is there's incentives, there's some other way to help people get into these houses and meet the sustainability goals.
I think what we heard over and over again from the consultant from Eco Northwest is that market rate housing is out of reach for most current Philomath residents. And so, if that's a concern, then we're going to need to look at some form of government incentivized or government subsidized housing, because the market rate itself is putting housing out of reach for the average citizen that lives here, or the average resident. So I think we are going to need to be a little more intentional. It is going to challenge us a little bit because traditionally, because I'll let the market kind of deal with itself, and the market dealing with itself has brought us pretty expensive housing. So this is not the end of the conversation. This is setting the table and really beginning that process of looking at the code and seeing what incentives and
Yeah, I was just seeing this as a whole new reality in terms of how we approach housing now in this community.
Jim?
The state is also working on rules currently for climate and equity development and housing in particular. They're a little late in getting those model rules out. And I think they're likely to be appealed by, I think City of Springfield maybe has already appealed them, partially because of process as much as anything. But I think there's going to be a fair amount of movement from the state, both in terms of maybe some grant funding for technical assistance and maybe some mandatory rules on how climate and equity issues are addressed in housing and in other development as well.
Thank you.
And then Chris, regarding goal 1, talks about land availability and requiring a certain balance, sufficient balance of lands available in each of the different zoning types within the, it sounds like not within the urban growth boundary, but within the city limits. Does that mean that the city might start to annex properties without having a development plan, or rezoning properties in unannexed areas? What's the intention there?
keep looking at both. I mean, the focus is going to be what property do you have in your short-term inventory that, if a would-be homeowner wanted to buy a lot and build a house on it, was there a place in town where they could do that? If they wanted to build a duplex, could they do that? If they want to come and build a cottage cluster, is there a place they could do that? So it's really about looking at what's available inside city limits now and making sure there's an even spread of that so that all housing types could be developed. But I also think a portion of that is looking into the urban growth boundary and looking at what does that future zoning look like? Do we have places within the urban growth boundary that are set for future low and medium and high density residential, so that when that property owner comes to the city to annex, we've already got an idea of what's there, what infrastructure is needed to support it, and those types of questions. So I think it's both a short-term inventory and long-term inventory. And really, it's been a little while since we've done a real hard look at our existing housing inventory on that zoning. And so I would fully anticipate that coming from the city planner, and the planning commission will have some recommendations on new areas of town that could be either upzoned or rezoned in order to try to meet these goals.
Councilor Andrade?
I actually had a question based on that as well. So, from what I remember, the forecasted or needed land for each zoning type was based on if we continued to have the same housing mix between single family, multi-unit housing, all of those different ones. And we never had that conversation. So I do have some issues with the wording of to meet the land needs identified in the housing needs analysis. Is there, is that a correct understanding of what the sufficient land is?
Yeah, I think that's accurate.
Okay. Thank you. Is this discussion time or just asking questions?
Discussion.
Okay. In that case, am I able
Yep.
to make a motion? I would like to make a motion to amend policy 1.1 to, actually, I'm going to need help with this because I want us to have this conversation with the community and then have policy 1.1 implemented. So how would I go about doing that?
So this is a public hearing.
Well,
Is that
you're
not-
now in deliberations.
Yes.
So one way to do that would be, we don't have a motion to do anything with this stuff at all yet. But if what you wanted to do was to say, look, I would like to pull policy 1.1 out for some further debate. So I want to table this until something else happens. You fill in what the something else is. And then maybe we can look at the rest of it. And then what we've got are some things that have been pulled out that you don't think are ready. That would
Okay.
require, I think that requires the rest of the council to say, yep, that's not ready. We'll bring that back in some form. But that might be the fastest way to move through things. And if we've got a short list of things that need to be discussed further or thought about further, then those can be addressed that way. We've got most of chapter 3 put together.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I definitely would like there to be a substantial conversation on this policy. I know I tried to look at what the housing mixes were, and I think I know what the numbers are, but I would rather we all talk about it and the concepts behind it and allow the community to explain to the community if they weren't aware what this housing mix meant.
Thank you. Chris or Ruth, at the planning commission, was this something that was brought up and discussed much, or?
No, I don't recall the housing needs analysis being questioned substantively. More of the focus was on the chapter itself.
Yeah, I think there's a general acceptance of the housing needs analysis as a document showing projections, and it was based on some assumptions, and so those assumptions are in there. As Councilor Andrade stated, it was kind of, if we continue to grow the way that we've been growing, here's what your future projections would look like. Based on that, here's the housing mix that you would need. And they kind of took that at face value.
And I know that the topic came up a fair bit during the discussion of the housing needs analysis, I think at council level, but yeah. So, and then Councilor Andrade, you had a follow-up?
Yeah, well, I was the one to bring it up during the initial discussions when we were discussing whether to approve the analyses from Eco Northwest. But I guess from what I remember, the assumptions were not stated clearly. And I just, no one ever agreed to those assumptions being the case. So if we were to meet the land needs that are, assumed to be what we want, that could be a big problem, especially because from what I understand, we shouldn't be continuing to have as much land designated to single family zoning as we currently do, because if we want to be in compliance with state rules.
Thank you. And so, according to your suggestion, maybe we should go through and identify anything that we want to pull and then have motions on at a later time.
Or so maybe you want to do it by motion. I'll pull this so Councilor Andrade would make a motion, somebody would second it.
Yeah.
And then somebody else has another piece that they want to pull, do the same thing, follow that process and just see what we've got that would be removed.
Similar to our minutes process. Yeah. Councilor Biscoe, you had your hand up?
I do. Just the conversation that's occurring here right now is suggesting that there's perhaps a more robust discussion that is appropriate here before we adopt any policies. The assumptions that Councilor Andrade has mentioned was brought up at both Planning Commission and the Council deliberations over that housing needs analysis and some of the process of that entire process and who was and was not involved. And it certainly we've done public notices of this, but I wonder too, when we start talking about those assumptions, Councilor Lowe has brought up, the discussion of affordable housing and sustainability, issues with housing, also words like cottage clusters, and pretty much the decision we're making on this policy is what Philomath is going to look like for everyone living in Philomath. And so I wonder if this is not an opportunity where there's not an urgent need that we look at this. We know DLCD and LCDC is actually planning on some pretty major and substantial rulemaking that is expected for July. So Council Brewer has mentioned this already. Expected July, I think 20 and 21. Those do have impacts for Philomath as a part of the Corvallis metropolitan area also. Is it appropriate to table any decision on this policy tonight, plan for an opportunity like a town hall, which is much more approachable and much more real for most folks when they see a notice on such a thing versus a planning commission public hearing? It's just a different kind of engagement, and bring all of these topics for discussion to the public who's going to be immediately impacted by this policy decision. It's a matter of pause for a moment, get some more feedback, frame it a little bit differently. We're really not involving our citizen CCI. It's a difference than citizen involvement. However, we've branded that. We're not really engaging in that process officially either. We have it, we've identified it, but we're not putting efforts behind that per se, other than just holding and noticing these meetings. So is there a way we can do better in this space on this particular policy in general?
Yeah, I can just speak to that generally, but I have talked to a number of my neighbors and other folks about this topic because it keeps getting brought up. Do people want us to continue to engage the public, or did they elect us to make decisions on their behalf? And I keep having this conversation, and I haven't had anyone say that we should hold more public hearings and more opportunities to engage the public on these topics. It sounds like they just want us to move forward and govern on some of these things. There's certainly other things like 11th Street that super important to have community engagement on, but I think there's a lot of these other things that frankly people aren't engaging with. We don't have a lot of people engaging with us in these top processes. And I think there's a reason for that. I think they're just interested in seeing us govern and making decisions. That's what they did. They elected us to do that. So that's what I'm hearing. I don't know what anybody else is hearing, but Councilor Biscoe.
So I appreciate that perspective. I don't think that represents everyone in Philomath necessarily. I think if any of us were going to have multiplexes go up in our neighborhood or in our back door, we'd probably want to know. We certainly haven't made every effort to engage. So if there's a mix of those opinions, and I know both Councilor Andrade and myself have expressed at a minimum, greater public engagement opportunities, we haven't done a whole lot of that. So is this a place where we can try that?
So this is maybe a good case example. What additional public engagement would you see being helpful to drive people to this topic of discussion?
So I
Outside
think,
of what's been done.
fair enough, thank you. I think, as I mentioned, let's frame this as a town hall. We know Benton County did an extensive planning process that involved the community. We also know that Corvallis has done that. There's numerous cities that can be pointed to across the state that have engaged in comprehensive planning. And our comprehensive planning is really summed up to documents showing up on the website. If you don't use the website, that's not helpful. Public hearings, which have been largely inaccessible due to the pandemic, more recently accessible now. But I think we're taking a lot of assumptions that we've done our best effort in engagement for a comprehensive plan that is 22 years old. So if this establishes that plan for the next 22 years, hopefully not, but let's just say that it duplicates what has happened in the past, can we hold a town hall?
So last week we held a town hall on wildfire prevention. This is coming off of probably one of the worst summers that we've had in Oregon history, at least in the valley history of wildfires. A lot of time and effort went into it. There's a lot of publicity went out into it. We had elected officials invited, and if you were in attendance at the meeting, there was a lot of good information there. A lot of information is spilling over into the website, and that website's been updated a little bit, and we've had some more information there. We had 31 people there, counting all the elected officials, all the appointees, staff, everybody there. I'm just not seeing, when you put wildfire danger and wildfire prevention up against housing policies, I'm just not seeing that you're gonna have that same level of engagement. There was a lot of time and effort and energy that went in that wildfire town hall. And my concern is, you schedule a town hall for any time you're gonna do a policy change, even if it's something like housing, which is important. I'm not minimizing the importance of the housing policies at all. I've been working on this for years now. So I'm not minimizing that effort. I'm just saying, I don't know that town halls are really gonna generate any more enthusiasm for the topic than the public hearings that we've held and the outreach we've already done. So I just put that out for consideration. I don't know that, as much as I would love for the entire community to come out and be engaged in this topic, I think what Mayor Jones has to say has a lot of relevancy. I just don't think people are that engaged in these types of topics when you're higher level. Now you talk about a duplex going in next door to you, you're gonna hear from those neighbors, absolutely. But when you're talking about, could a duplex go into a zoning similar to that which is next door to you? I just don't think you get the public engagement at that level. But I might be wrong.
So Mayor, can I respond?
Yeah.
Super. So I would say that if we haven't tried it, and since you weren't here 22 years ago and we had our comprehensive plan development before, I'd like to be given that opportunity for our community to be engaged. Certainly Corvallis and Benton County felt it was worth the resource investment. I would say comparatively that we've spent over a dozen meetings for our medallions for our sidewalks, which I think is important, but we've expended a tremendous amount more resources for that effort when you look at staffing and city council time and committee time. Why would we not think that policy development for our housing and how we plan the next generation of the growth of Philomath is not at least worth messaging, branding, and carrying that message beyond, gee, it's another public meeting.
And do you have a proposed motion? I mean, do you want to make a motion?
I thought we were having a discussion.
No,
I don't know
I'm just
that I
trying to
was-
help. I'm just trying to help the process.
I guess I'd rather open the floor for any other comments and opinions first before making a motion.
Councilor.
Just another thing that Councilor Biscoe mentioned that I'd like to ask Councilor Brewer, but in light of the state rulings, I guess, that are coming out, is there something of substance there you think that might affect what we're looking at today, or that you'd want to incorporate, or?
Or maybe not.
Go ahead, Councilor Lehman.
It's hard to tell because they were supposed to have the rules out in early June, I believe, and they didn't. So it's kind of hard to tell what the issues are going to be. But I think in terms of how you make housing climate effective and at the same time keep an eye on particularly economic equity, that's going to be tricky. That'll be interesting to see. And they may have good ideas that you want. They may have terrible ideas that you don't want.
Seems that maybe time is not urgent, but we'd want to have that if it's coming out soon. To me, it makes sense, but.
So I think it just needs to be mentioned that the rulemaking that is going on is the result of an executive order from the governor who is going out of office in November, or in January. So as we've seen in the news over the last week or so, things change. And so if we want to make some really cool rules that we like, I think we should do that regardless of what the state rules are, because the state rules can change after the next election. So I agree that we need to pay attention and comply with the state rules. I'm just saying that they're not going to be carved in stone, and as evidenced by the fact that they're already behind and can't come to an agreement on the executive order to make everybody happy, it's clear why they needed to use an executive order to accomplish that to begin with. And so I'm not 100% confident that the rules that come out are going to be the rules that we deal with 2 or 3 years from now.
Thank you. Councilor Causey?
Yes, I'd like to clarify one point, and I'd also like to make a motion. Councilor Bisco mentioned that there was more time invested in the sidewalk inlays and having, I'm a member of the Ad Hoc Public Arts Committee, and I sit on all the planning commissions at meetings and on these meetings, and there was far more time spent on our planning and our comprehensive plan and the housing plan and the economic proposals, and there's no comparison. So I did want to clarify that point. Also, I'd like to move that the City Council adopt the findings presented in the staff report dated 6/27/2022 for PC 22-03 to amend the comprehensive plan and recommend an amending ordinance be presented to the council for consideration.
And thank you for that. Is that a second?
I'll second.
So we have a motion made by Councilor Causey and seconded by Councilor Nielsen. Any further discussion? Or do you want to speak to the motion?
No.
Any further discussion? Councilor Lehman?
Yeah, I have, I just want to throw this out there for everyone to think about, but it seems like as soon as we put housing into the marketplace, the affordability issue goes out the window, even if we subsidize the development by lowering SDCs or things like that. As soon as someone takes ownership and it's deemed livable, then it goes into the marketplace and all of that goes out the window. So I'm wondering, I know the comprehensive plan is comprehensive and it's not a detail-oriented thing. I'm just wondering if we want to put some intentions into the comprehensive plan about affordable housing in particular, that if we want to subsidize the development of housing, that's fine, but I think we should put some conditions on it to make sure that the market doesn't undo all of our good works the second after we've done it. And I don't know if the comprehensive plan is the place to do that or not, but even just making some kind of a notation that, you know, if we want to subsidize housing, which is a fine and lofty goal and something I think we should look at, we need to remove that housing from the quote unquote marketplace to maintain it as is its intended use.
And I think there are opportunities, because there's opportunities to do that. For instance, if the city or any other entity like Habitat for Humanity buys the land and builds a house on top of it and rents out the land, or rents out the house for a long period of time, that does take it out of the market in a different kind of way. It's gonna be cheaper because you're not buying the land. It seems like there are opportunities that aren't just pure subsidy, but I don't know.
Yeah, so I'm just talking about actions by the city,
Right, yeah.
what we can do. And it just alarms me a little that we may forego SDCs, or may forego infrastructure improvements, or we may forego some of the cool things that I would like to do, like require all the electricity to be underground in new development and things like that, because those two are counterintuitive, right? Cheap housing, but bury all the utilities and, make it as carbon friendly as possible and keep it cheap. And then also don't let the market come in and wash away all the subsidies that you put in there, and just basically you're writing a check to the homeowner for X number of thousands of dollars. That doesn't seem like it's going to solve the housing issue to me.
Yeah, there's examples of good code language out there. Used to be more experimental code language, hasn't had been challenged yet, but some of it has been challenged now and has been held up in the courts, and so, or it's been upheld in the courts, not held up, been upheld in the courts, where there are conditions you can put on housing types and different types of housing ownerships. There was a pretty good discussion about this at the planning commission level on this section because of that exact topic you're talking about, those market rates. I'm not a huge proponent, although I see there's a certain segment of population needed for government subsidized affordable rental housing. There's obviously a need there, but Oregon housing dollars by far go to that small niche of the housing market, I think much more than it needs to. There's language in here, I'm thinking 3.7 that talks about supporting home ownership opportunities for all housing types, encouraging condominiums, cooperative housing, manufactured home parks, other types of ownership methods that allow residents to build equity. So, I mean, there was some talk about how do you keep from just, okay, we're going to give these subsidies or tax breaks, whatever it is, the developer's going to put it in pocket today and charge less money for rent tomorrow. It's still, so the renter's paying less money, but 10 years down the road, they're not any further ahead, right? And so I think there's got to be a mix there of not only encouraging that. There's nothing in here that says the city has to subsidize the development to make it happen, right? There's obviously leanings that way. Like if you want to help the housing be more affordable, the city should consider subsidies and tax breaks and STC, all those types of things. But with that discussion, I think it's going to be imperative that the city council keep that thought in mind, that how do we do this without having the developer, the owner, still charge market rate for something. They've been the beneficiary of all of the sweat equity and the subsidies that have gone into it. So, if there's specific language policy-wise, I think there's a couple examples in here. The one I just read, I think is good. 3.3, which talks about incorporate mechanisms to stabilize, reduce the cost of housing, collaboration with nonprofits, for-profit, government developers, low-income housing, providing density bonuses, other incentives to encourage higher densities, tax abatements or cost exemptions for low-income housing projects, those types of things. So there's some basic, kind of more general guidelines in here, but this doesn't set a clear policy. Like the city will establish this program, for example. But we put something more specific there. We tried to be pretty general on leaving the door open on what types of programs the city council would want to do. So I don't know.
I guess I just don't want people to have the impression 5 years from now that the city council decided as a group that we should do these things because it says in the comprehensive plan, you should strongly consider subsidizing SDCs and things like that. So does that mean 5 years from now, does that mean, it says in comprehensive plan, we should subsidize by lowering SDCs?
It sounds like an amendment is appropriate.
When I hear strongly consider, I think the city council needs to have a discussion about that. And in that discussion, you're going to look at how much are we talking about? What's it going to cost to the taxpayers or the ratepayers or whoever it is where that money's coming from? What's the benefit that we get? Is that benefit going to be sustainable or is it, so to me, that's the consideration. It doesn't mean that you're going to do it. It means you're going to look at it. And if the costs aren't met by the benefits, then you don't go forward, but you can at least look at say, we considered it, it doesn't pan out still, we couldn't make it work.
But
Maybe that language is too loose.
You may want language that directs exploration to get to code language. That explore the tools that could be in the code so that affordable housing is maintained as affordable housing. it's a kind of off the cuff thing, but
Right.
I think it's a policy direction for what you want your code to do is a way to think of it.
Right. So I guess I'm just wondering how that's different than all the things that are enumerated in here.
It would, I don't think any of these talk about your specific issue,
Mhm.
which is how do we maintain affordable housing as affordable housing if we've provided
Gotcha.
incentives for
Right. So we could try and put that in somewhere like in section 3, right?
Mhm. And I think city managers comment about 3.3 or 3.7, both would be possible. You might have a new amendment that you want to suggest that just addresses that issue.
Right.
Again, within 3 someplace.
Yeah.
Why don't we let you think about that
Why
for a little bit,
Why
and we
don't
can have Councilor Disco ask her
Great.
on that.
So I'm just gonna come back to the point of this whole policy and really the ramifications of what it could mean. Any land use application with, if we adopt this policy, will fall under these guidelines, correct, Council Brewer?
Well,
Any housing development applications?
sort of. The goal behind your comprehensive plan is it is the policy direction for the regulations that you put in place. So it should be the guide for your development code and for other development related ordinances addressing housing. Whether that's how SDCs work, whether that's how you're going to provide public infrastructure in other ways, the policy that those things are implementing comes from the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan itself might not apply except when you're looking at some conditional development of variance, a PUD, those kinds of things, where the question isn't that if it meets all of the code language, you're not going to have a policy interpretation to make. But if it's where I'm asking to do something different, I want to vary from those standards, then one of the questions is always, well, is it consistent with the policies in your comprehensive plan?
So thank you for that. I'm curious of a couple things. This policy will impact our downtown streetscapes planning, our area-wide planning. I mean, housing really impacts all the things that we do, including our transportation, and certainly our development and urban growth boundary expansions. None of us, I don't think, can speak to the fact, I don't think any of us can say we're experts on housing or on sustainability or affordability. And I wonder why we're not leveraging experts in our community, why we're not looking at, if we don't want to do a town hall, which seems like a really small ask, to start a conversation, are we willing to do an ad hoc committee? This just seems like a far greater decision to make without, I don't think any of us can represent the community without having more resources at hand. And certainly Echo Northwest was not a full comprehensive resource, and we've acknowledged that both by Planning Commission and Council deliberation over these policies. I'm a little bit unclear why we wouldn't look to leverage community involvement given the opportunity here. And I think taking the position that, well, we're elected to make these decisions, this is true, but this is a substantial policy. And to Councilor Lehman's point, true, the governor's executive order has influenced the climate-friendly and equitable communities conversations. However, those conversations are coming, whether it's this governor or otherwise, and the deliberation was, the length of added time was to continue to allow public engagement, perhaps more than it was a discussion of we don't agree with all this. And there's a lot of policy that is not agreed upon between the policymaking group and the cities as I'm hearing it. However, it doesn't mean that sustainability and equitable community development and such is not coming down the pipeline anyhow. So is there room in this space to have a broader community conversation?
And then a follow-up question is, so these are the general guidelines that will develop, that will guide future city policy and ordinances. And so when we engage the community on each of those items will have additional opportunity to gather community input as we develop policy based upon, or as we develop rules based upon this overall policy.
Yes, you would again have public hearings on the text amendment for the code.
Mayor, can I finish my comment?
Oh, yeah, sure do.
Super. It's okay, go ahead.
Councilor Nissen.
You know, from my point of view and listening to all the discussions that have been very helpful, it seems that it would be difficult to anticipate all the differing proposals that could vary from the standards that we have. That could be kind of like a constant cycle that may stall the progress of our city as well. And it would be difficult, I think, that's why I'm asking, how could we anticipate those as?
You can't, and what I would say is most communities, they're, we have the kind of normal statement that, look, if you can meet the requirements of the code, you meet the criteria, particularly for housing, you use clear and objective standards and you get approval. Most of the process that people spend on is, yeah, but I got a different idea. Or I have a piece of property that's more difficult to develop, or I have components of things, and the way that they would naturally go in under your code isn't the way that I need to develop this property, and that is what you spend your time on, and that is also where you then go back to your policies and say, geez, what in the world does that mean? What did they mean when they wrote that? And sometimes you'll have, and it's completely normal to have conflicting policies because you've got different goals for things. And your economic goals and your housing goals may not fit hand in glove, and that then becomes part of governance, that how do you balance those things? Whether it's in developing code language or in a specific approval for somebody who's bringing a variance to you.
So I understand that there's some subjectivity then to what we're doing here. So in having this type of comprehensive code, there still needs to be subjectiveness and as we address issues that may vary from these standards.
Well, these are not standards. So the policies are policy language. So it is subjective in terms of how you want those policies to be read, what policies you want to have in place within a framework that we have statewide planning goals, and our policies can't abrogate those goals. So as long as they're falling within those, you have a lot of room for how you would like these things to be worded and how you want them to be ultimately implemented too.
And so future councils, follow-up questions, future councils then will have the ability then to interpret according to what is presented to them and what is in the standards here to see how the direction
That's correct, and there's language that you may have noticed in here that every 5 years there'll be an effort to take a look at things and update. So
Just thinking about language, I mean, can we say that these policies and these goals they're aspirational in nature? So they're kind of like, we'd like to be here, but the specifics of how we do it and whatever will get worked out with specific issues or applications that come along in the future in the context of the times, I guess, so whatever.
Yeah. Chris?
So, yeah, behind each of these policies, there's either objectives or specific action items that were identified either in the Eco Northwest Housing Needs Analysis, where they had a policy or goal and then there were specific action items. Or when we looked at other communities and looked at their comprehensive plans, the Planning Commission found examples there of things that they liked that were outside of what was in Eco Northwest's examples that they provided. And when they found those and latch on those, they were usually bullet points spin on how they were structured. It wasn't common for them to have very specific things in their comprehensive plan that they like, but there's this balance between how specific do you want your comprehensive plan to be and how general do you want it to be. And we lean towards being more general, but in some areas we kind of tipped our hand a little bit to what the planning commission was thinking, or tried to make an effort to say, you know, when we say, I'm going to give an example off the top of my head, but there was an effort to show that this is the policy that we generally want to speak, and we're going to do this by considering things like points A, B, and C. So we didn't say do this by doing points A, B, and C. We're saying we want to do this by considering things like A, B, and C. And so there's several of these policies that are like that, and that was very intentional. Looking at all the bullet points on page 2 of 4 under policy 2.1 is a great example where these bullet points are all things the planning commission felt pretty passionate about, but they didn't want to, I would say, do this. It was develop clear and objective standards that could do, to the greatest extent possible, could do these bullet points, right? So again, there was a lot of effort put in the way that the planning commission and staff crafted this to not tie the hands of policymakers, but to give some guidance so that when we talked about 2.1 at a policy level, when we start talking about code language that's going to actually do this, okay, here's the policy. Now what's the wording that we're going to put into the development code that's actually going to help
Implement the policy.
Implement that policy. So that's where really that debate and discussion is going to come. And again, these policies are important. I don't want to minimize the importance of them, but we're not going to refer back to these policies when a subdivision comes in. That subdivision developer, they're going to look at code language and what's required in the code, and that's going to reflect this. So there's time we can work through these policies. That the policy, I mean, I'll just, in short, we can spend another 2 years working on these policies and not have them exactly right. Or we can get policies put in place and we start having discussions about code language and getting our code updated so that future developments coming into Philomath over the next 6 months, year, 2 years are better reflected on what the community wants to see, which currently isn't the case because our current comprehensive plan strategies are a bit long in the tooth, and our code language reflects what was then in place 20 years ago. We've done some updates there, but we really are looking for some updated policies and some updated direction for the planning commission and staff to look at so that we can start updating that and getting more towards, I think, what the city council would like to see in our housing going forward. So just with caution, and there's, for everything there's pros and cons. So one of the benefits of taking some more time would be we may end up with some better policy. The disadvantage is going to be it's another 3, 4, 6, however many months out before we can start working on the actual code language that's going to be directed by this policy.
But maybe an approach is back to what we were discussing earlier, which is, are there things that you simply don't like or can't live with? Let's pull those out, and you can adopt the things that, yeah, the rest of this is fine. And then you're working on it over that longer period, a pretty discrete group of policies rather than, oh yeah, I never mentioned this before, but here's this thing on 4 or 5, let's go back and talk about it before we ever get anything else done. So can we get done with the things that everybody would agree, yep, that works, and pull out the things that people don't agree on.
So we have the motion on the table.
And then Councilor Raymond, do you have a suggested amendment?
I do. Are you ready for it?
Yes.
Okay. I move to add policy 3.8 to the document. And that policy is to evaluate opportunities for the city to participate in subsidizing housing for all income levels and methods of maintaining the value of that subsidy over time.
Huh. Ruth, do you want to get that in writing?
Well, if he has it written down, that's awesome.
You don't?
But I think I got it.
Sounded pretty good.
Did you have it in writing?
I don't.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I assumed that you did.
I can repeat
It
it.
was very good. Officer Cox.
Thanks.
Ruth, can you attempt to restate that?
To amend action number 1 to add policy 3.8 to the document. And that policy is to evaluate opportunities for the city to participate in subsidized housing for all income levels and the maintenance
Maintaining the value of subsidy over
and
time.
maintaining the value of that subsidy over time.
That was good.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I got a cat. I don't know what cat was supposed to be.
Councilor Kazi.
Um,
Oh, wait, so that was a motion?
Mhm.
Second. Yeah, motion made by Councilor Lehman and seconded by Councilor Fisk. Sorry, and Councilor Kazi.
I just wanted to question, because policies 3.1 and 3.2 specifically address supporting housing for lower income levels. And the way that your policy is worded would suggest that you would subsidize housing for higher income as well, which I'm not sure is appropriate. I mean, it seems to me the focus of your concern was on maintaining the subsidization, maintaining the affordability
Correct.
of subsidized housing rather than subsidizing it. Is that correct?
I guess my point is that I don't think that any efforts that don't involve direct subsidization by someone, some government entity, whether it's the state or the city or the county, are going to be successful in maintaining affordable housing, because once the ownership of that housing transfers, then it's in the market and it's worth whatever anybody will pay for it.
Okay. My suggestion would be that you focus on maintaining the affordability of subsidized housing rather than on.
Right.
Could you use the words at all income levels?
That's what I thought I said.
You did say that.
Yeah.
And so I think you're suggesting that that part of the language might be problematic?
Well, you don't really need to subsidize all income.
And the reason I said
Okay.
all income levels was because of the nature of the comprehensive plan. We're going to evaluate like all these criteria that are listed here, but not all of them are going to be applied to each thing. And we could, if someone wanted to get us, the city, to subsidize their McMansion, we could definitely evaluate it. And we could say, no, we're not going to do that.
Evaluate covers that well, yes.
But is that opening, or, sorry, but is that opening up the city for, we have mega yachts now, we have mega everything. Is that going to use our time and resources where we need to be used for big mansions to be deliberated?
I guess if we establish the code language and the rules about how you can get subsidy from the city to develop the housing, then we can put things in there that would make it unattractive for someone who wants to build $1 million house to come seeking some subsidy for that.
I don't know if I'm comfortable with the all income level piece. I think,
So how would you phrase it?
I found it up here for city subsidized for low and, could we do low and middle incomes?
Well, so we do have the policy about,
But that's supporting, you're talking about maintaining, which we
Right.
don't have on that other. The other 3.2, I don't believe says maintain, does it?
no,
Not-
nothing does.
And that was the important piece of what you were talking about, I felt,
Right. Yeah,
was the maintaining the value of the subsidy over time. So rather than making it for all income levels, could we not just add that maintaining the value of subsidy over time to something that would be more focused on where we really feel the need might be?
I'm open to just doing low, extremely low, and middle income. That's fine with
Do you
me.
see what I mean to say?
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to be overly
Yeah.
critical, just.
Maybe is it more of a just evaluate, so when you're, because we've already got several policies in here that talk about providing subsidies of some sort or whatever. So maybe the emphasis needs to be on, evaluate housing assistance programs for their ability to sustain low income over time or to maintain the subsidy over the life of the home or something like that, which is really getting to your point. It's really
And
more
just
about-
remove all income
Yeah,
stuff.
So it's really a matter of any policy that we're doing, we're gonna evaluate this based on its ability to maintain that subsidy as far into the future as possible.
That's what I want.
Get the knowledge.
See, that's why we have these meetings.
So if you
Yay!
just struck at all income levels or for all income levels, the rest of that is evaluate opportunities for cities to participate in subsidized housing and something
And-
while
and
maintaining the
yes.
value of subsidy over time.
Yes,
Wow.
I'm happy to do that.
Would you like to make a motion to amend?
Do I have to make a motion to amend
Amend.
that?
Say so moved and she.
So moved, yeah.
And second.
Again, I'm afraid that I did not realize that was coming as a
Right.
motion,
So
so
we just
Councilor
struck-
Bisco, you're going to need to restate it.
Evaluate opportunities for cities to participate in subsidized housing while maintaining the value of subsidy over time, or of the subsidy over time.
Councilor Cosy, you had a comment?
I'm sorry, did you say the city or cities?
Evaluate opportunities for the city, I'm sorry, it was for the city to participate in subsidized housing while maintaining the value of the subsidy over time.
And we'll have the city recorder clarify what she had written.
Okay, so, and so then, Councilor Lehman made that motion.
Yes.
And is there a second for the amendment?
Second.
And Councilor Bisco second.
And Councilor Brewer, can I ask a question? Does that seem to address what we, under your understanding of what we want to do with this piece about the maintaining the subsidy? Does that amendment seem to, does the vocabulary in that amendment seem to do what we would like it
I
to do?
think it gives you room to do that, yes.
Okay. Sorry.
And city recorder, can you just one more time read the new amended motion?
Yes. We're amending Councilor Lehman's original motion to evaluate opportunities for the city to participate in subsidized housing while maintaining the value of the subsidy over time.
They sound like what?
Yes.
So let's first vote on the amendment to the original motion, and then we can vote on the motion. So all in favor of amending the motion as stated, please raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries unanimously. And then the motion to, now we're going to vote on the amended motion. So all in favor of passing the motion as stated?
Point of order.
As amended? Yes, Councilor Andrade.
The motion is Councilor Lehman's motion to amend, not, I didn't hear what Councilor Kazi's original motion was, so I just want to clarify that.
We're voting to add bullet policy 3.8
Got
per
it, thank you.
Councilor Lehman's amended motion. So all in favor of adding policy 3.8 as amended, please raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries unanimously. Any further discussion on the on Councilor Kazi's motion to Councilor Andrade?
To Councilor Bisco's point earlier about wanting to leverage the community's knowledge and expertise about the community in which we all live in, I really have concerns about policy 1.1. So from what I've seen, I think I like most of these policies, but that one in particular, I am not okay with currently. Do I need to make a motion to have it removed? Or is that something that we can
Yes.
just remove the way that Mayor Jones had said for the minutes?
Yeah, you can make a motion to remove.
Okay, did Chris need to say something first, or?
I was just gonna make a recommendation, if you're open to it. What if you change the last bit of that policy 1.1 to read, ensure that there is sufficient land in each residential plan designation to meet the city's residential land needs, period, rather than referring back to the housing needs analysis.
I would appreciate that better. I guess I just want to ensure that we aren't setting ourselves up for. I don't want people to assume that the housing needs analysis housing mix is what it is that we want. So I'm afraid that even if we use that word, people will still think what is written here as the housing needs analysis being what the city needs in terms of buildable land.
Okay. And Chris?
So the housing needs analysis has been approved by the city, an
Yes.
appendix to the comprehensive plan.
Mm-hmm.
But if we're not going to reference it, then this change in language this way would allow us to have another study done, bring additional findings or something new. So if we could point to something 2 years from now that says that this is what the city's new housing need is, then this policy still is intact and it's still whole, because we're not referring solely to the housing needs analysis. We're just referring to the city's housing needs. That allows the city to still interpret what the city's housing needs are. We can't pull it out of the air, but we could definitely find a different study, a different document other than the housing needs analysis that was conducted.
How do we make sure that another study is done as opposed to just relying on what is here already and calling it good?
I think, it wouldn't necessarily come up until we were looking at taking some measure that was going to follow this policy to ensure there's sufficient land in each residential plan designation. So if we were taking land from a high density residential and making it low density, or low density to high density, we would look back to this policy and see, does this follow this policy? Are we ensuring that we have sufficient land for the city's needs? And that could be based on current trends. It could be based on more recent trends. It could be based on a future forecast from PSU. I mean, there's any number of things you could base that off of. But it gets away from, I think, your concern, which is it's relying on the housing needs analysis, which you took some issues with how that was calculated and how that was processed. So I'm just trying to get to, I think 1.1 is intended to be a very broad policy on, we just want to make sure we've got housing types of all kinds for the city's housing needs. We're just not going to refer back to the housing needs analysis. I think it cleans it up pretty easy, pretty good.
Okay.
Councilor Biscoe?
Oh,
sorry. Councilor Biscoe has her hand up.
I was just going to ask if anyone else has something they want to say about that topic.
So I'm assuming that because that housing needs analysis is an appendix to our comp plan, that it's likely to be referred to, but I'm also assuming that the, I don't know if disclaimer is the right word, but the document that Councilor Lehman and Councilor Andrade and myself drafted that did acknowledge that there were some concerns about the process that Echo Northwest took is also included in that.
It's in the comp plan, yes.
Okay, in which case that also reinforces that perhaps we should look at other sources for considering our sufficient land for residential plan designations. Okay, thank you.
Councilor Andrade, did you want to make a motion per city manager's suggestion, or no?
So moved. Can I do that?
Can.
And I will second.
Okay, so we have a motion made by Councilor Andrade and seconded by Councilor Biscoe to modify the language. Chris, do you want to just clarify with that amendment?
Yeah, so policy 1.1, we would replace the end of that sentence, land needs identified in the housing needs analysis, with the phrase city's residential land needs, period.
Councilor Biscoe? Any further discussion of that point? All in favor of amending that policy 1.1 as stated, please raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion carries unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you for the suggestion, Chris.
Any further discussion? Councilor Biscoe.
So just a clarification question, not to any specific policy, but Chris, you had shared that if we were looking at an application, for example, land use application, that we would be relying on our code. I know that some of our past staff reports do in fact include these policies as well in their recommendations. So we don't just rely on our code, we do in fact incorporate these policies into that staff report and that consideration for development. To that point, and knowing that that's important and that any application that comes in, while we are considering making code adjustments that reflect these policies, wherever they land, the current code as it stands is what we use in that decision-making process. Is there an action plan, if this is approved this evening, that, so the disparity that exists in Philomath exists because we've not taken much action on affordable housing and we haven't really embedded it in our policies or our codes. Is there an action plan that we are proposing where the council is going to weigh in and point to the planning commission and give them some guidance on, we would like recommendations brought on specific policies? I mean, do we have that availability in our work sessions upcoming where we can prioritize this discussion?
I think we have the ability to do that. I think we also, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, that we have the ability to offer a specific direction, but that at any time, otherwise, the planning commission could start to develop policy, or the city could start to develop policy to help promote, or rules or criteria to help promote any of the policies that we're setting forth here, because this is us giving direction to the city to start to push things forward so that we can improve our code and our criteria for housing development in the future.
So would a work session be appropriate to prioritize which of these policies we'd like to encourage discussion on? These are very broad and very deep, especially with other things occurring.
We could talk about that anytime. I think first, I mean, yes, we could have a work session, but I think that it would be good to be more strategic in that rather than just coming up with something tonight, personally. Chris?
So the report from Eco Northwest has a recommendation of prioritization on implementing the policies that they put forward. Now, some of their policies made it into this final version, some of them didn't. There's added ones in there. So to me, that'd be a staff function to take a look at that prioritization and have it reflect what's actually in here now, bring a recommendation to the city council. Some of those things, again, may drop into the strategic plan. Some of them may fall into recommendation for the planning commission to take a look at. And so we can work at that at the staff level. I can have the city planner kind of finish going through that prioritization list. So we still have a starting spot and some recommendations on what to go forward. Some of this stuff we run into on a weekly or monthly basis. Some of it we rarely run into. And so, obviously those things that are more likely to hit on the radar in the next 6 months are the things we'd want to look at first.
Sure. With that, we can go ahead and let's go ahead and vote on the original motion as stated by Councilor Kazi. Ruth, can you remind us of the motion?
The City Council adopt the findings presented in the staff report dated 6/27/2022 for PC 2203 to amend the comprehensive plan and recommend an amending ordinance to be presented to the council for consideration as amended. Well, as amended should probably go after comprehensive plan.
So to incorporate the amendments that we made this evening, the two amendments.
Okay, read that again.
Does anyone need her to read that one more time?
The comprehensive plan as amended is
Comprehensive plan
recommended.
as amended.
Okay. With that, all in favor of passing the motion as amended, please raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you for that. And I wanted to express our sincere thanks to the Planning Commission for spending so much time on that and coming up with a great proposed plan.
We should be able to get an ordinance pulled together by your July
yes.
meeting, but it may be August.
Okay, so should we put a date on there?
No. I will shoot for July. It might be August.
So we'll ask staff to prepare formal findings and an ordinance for the council to consider.
Unless you want to.
And with that, we're moving on to a break. Let's go ahead and take a 5-minute break and we will come back and start off with a public hearing or with public comments.
the same part.
Counselor Nielsen?
We're going back online.
Counselor Nielsen? What happened to our camera?
It finds the ceiling more interesting,
Oh, I see.
so don't take it personally.
There it is.
Oh, we're doing good.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Remind me to keep my feet on the floor.
No, footsie at these
Yeah.
meetings.
You, Jim.
It
Okay,
is a cool camera.
so we'll call the meeting back to order. Thank you very much. So we're gonna first start off with public comments. And this time it is intended for individuals to speak and for council to listen. Members of the council will not discuss topics or make decisions during this time, but may take comments or requests under advisement, assign topics to a future council or a standing committee agenda, or request staff to take an action. Comments about a topic scheduled for a public hearing should be given during the public hearing, not during visitors' comments. Testimony time is limited to 3 minutes per speaker. A 30-second warning will be provided. Speakers should provide their name and city of residence. Providing the council with a copy of your comments prior to or during the proceedings is always appreciated. Those who attend public meetings are required to adhere to the council's rules of proceedings and observe the same standards of decorum as members of the council. Further, at the discretion of the presiding officer, members of the public who fail to observe these rules of procedure will be asked to discontinue speaking and will not be allowed to speak again for the remainder of the meeting. So with that, I have 6 people signed up for public comment. And I'm gonna start with Peggy Yoder. She's the only one speaking on the neighborhood traffic management plan.
Where am I supposed to
You're
sit?
gonna sit next to Councilor Bisco.
Oh, okay. I did provide copies for you all. I know that a lot of you like to read it. I didn't get it to the city recorder in time. I apologize for that.
Thank you.
That's good.
And go ahead and start whenever you're ready.
Okay, I'm Peggy Yoder. I'm a citizen of Philomath. I appreciate the consideration by the City Council to adopt a neighborhood traffic management program. I have been interested in this issue for many years and have attended the police committee meetings when I was invited. If the City Council adopts a program, I believe South 15th Street fits the criteria for a pilot mitigation program, with many of the stipulations having already been met. The Neighborhood Speed Watch program originally initiated in 2008, in which 28 households signed a petition regarding their concern over traffic speeds on South 15th Street. The vast majority of those that signed still live on that street. Electronic speed sign with no memory was posted in May of 2020, considerably reduced traffic speed while it was in use. Radar sign posted in September 2020 showed very low traffic numbers, possibly due to the COVID-related shutdown schools and businesses, but it did reduce the traffic speed considerably while it was in use. As shown in tonight's packet, the Philomath Street classification map shows that South 15th Street is a local street. The Philomath Municipal Code states that a local street means a street designed to provide vehicular access to abutting property and to discourage through traffic. Along with speeding, South 15th Street also has cut-through traffic. In March 2021, Chief Rubin stated that over the years, many speeding tickets have been issued on South 15th Street. I ask that the City Council carefully review the language of this document and, if approved, proceed with making our neighborhood streets safer. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Yoder, appreciate that. And with that, I believe the remainder of the visitors are wishing to speak about North 11th Street. And so first we will start with Mr. Jeff Peavy.
Don't start the clock yet, I got a couple
It's okay.
brochures for you guys to look at. I think I have enough.
We can share.
You guys can share? Great. This is what we're talking about. There's enough of them. Okay. My name's Jeff Peavy. I live on North 11th Street in Philomath. I've been here before. 20 years ago, the city manager and his council dropped the ball. Quail Glen developers were not held accountable for their conditions of approval obligations. All I've asked the city since day one of these council meeting hearings is that the city does not let history repeat itself and fail the property owners of 11th Street and the rest of the taxpayers for that matter. Those of us that have called Philomath home for years have paid our fair share of taxes to help with schools, roads, libraries, city employees, etc. Subdivisions that come into the city are here to make a buck. Many build houses, sell properties, and then get out. Pro-growth is the MO of our city management. Pro-growth sometimes leads to poorly planned subdivisions, missing property markers, and health concerns such as methane gas, etc. I'm sure that this is not happening, I'm glad this is not happening on my street. The developer of Heather Glen subdivision has been a stand-up guy. When I bought the property lot number 10 adjacent to the residence, I signed a declaration of covenants document which governed building stipulations such as siding type, square footages, no manufactured homes, etc. This guy wants to make a nice place for folks to live comfortably. He even named the roads after his grandchildren. My lot and lot 9, just north of mine, had to have a storm water detention pond 20 foot wide all along the eastern line of the property. The developer built the detention pond, installed a block wall and a chain link fence. Now he just needs to finish the sidewalks and 3/4 street improvements that he agreed to complete. I was assured by the developer that he was going to pay for those improvements through a deferral agreement, including the off-site sidewalk connectivity. I was really surprised while reviewing the emails between Mr. Fear and Mr. Workman that says the site plan maps don't show anything for the sidewalk. I gave you guys this picture and it shows the sidewalk going right to my house. Detention, it clearly shows the sidewalk across the Heather Glen subdivision and connecting to the existing sidewalk in front of my house.
Excuse me, 30 seconds.
3 minutes?
30 seconds.
Oh, 30. You have the tree right in front of my house, right? According to the email from the engineering guy, the total cost deferred of the $191,000 appeared to be reasonable. Let's establish a timeline. Mr. Dow initiate the work so he can complete his required improvements. I would be interested in option number 5 if the Heather Glen subdivision would continue the sidewalk to meet up with my existing sidewalk, and if the street improvement took care of curbs, gutters as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Peavy. And with that, we then have Mr. Knudsen. I'm sorry, actually Ms. Caldwell.
Frances Caldwell, 359 North 11th Street. Mr. Workman set up 6 options to deal with the North 11th Street problem. And I've looked through all of them, and I could agree with option 2, which says the city should abandon the street improvements and use CAMPO money for sidewalks on the west side, or option 5, which Jeff just recommended, which would abandon the LID and proceed with city-funded road construction with property owners installing sidewalks within 3 years. Either of those I could go with. However, before any construction is initiated, the funding promised by Heather Glen Development should be collected by the city and applied to the project. This project via an LID has had a bad smell since its inception. To my knowledge, no one who lives on North 11th Street has ever been in favor of an LID. In all its reconstructions, this LID has placed undue financial burdens on property owners. Add to this, rules were broken throughout the process. There were never enough non-remonstrance agreements from property owners to put this through, though we were told there were. As the engineer's emails to the city manager indicate, Heather Glen was supposed to put up the funds required by their conditions of approval to build before construction plans could be initiated. So yes, there was a time frame, and no, they've never put up the required funding. So let's be content with option 2 or option 5, as long as Heather Glen is required to put in what their conditions of approval require. Both options give pedestrians a safe place to walk and hopefully rid us of that dangerous gully that runs where a sidewalk should be. So that's it. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ms. Caldwell, appreciate it. And with that, we have Mr. Knudsen.
Mark Knudsen, Philomath. I do not take issue with the city manager's recommendation in tonight's agenda packet of option 2, but I would like to clarify my position on some of the comments contained in the city manager's recommendation. The city manager takes responsibility for not having better agreements in place with us and with Heather Glen. Would like to point out that the agreement that was used with the Knudsens is exactly what the city has always used with individual properties on unimproved streets, make improvements. Philomath does not have a history of requiring individual properties to carry the burden of street improvement when they improve. The city manager recommendation goes on to state, by entering into the non-remonstrance agreements with the Knudsens, the city placed the properties in a position to receive the same access to city grants, street SCCs, street funds, contributions, intended to lower the cost of improvements for existing property owners. The city manager states that this was not the intention, understanding, or intention of either party. As far as understanding goes, when we signed our agreements, there was never a moment when we thought that we wouldn't have access or that we wouldn't have equity or access to those funds like the rest of the people on the street would. This was also consistent with Oregon law. It is offensive for me to hear the city manager claim to know what my intention was. You have a 5-page email that's filled with facts and examples from the public record, and I'm not discussing anything about what the intentions were. The city manager recommendation goes on to state the conditions of approval for Heather Glen do not state timelines. There's so many times throughout that it says specifically that either do the work first or get the contractual and financial guarantees in place. It was also one of the conditions of approval. I was on the planning commission and I hadn't even remembered. I assumed that the city would just follow through, but one of the conditions of approval was an affidavit confirming that the applicant had conformed with, let me see, the applicant had conformed, I'm drawing a blank on that. But basically an affidavit saying the applicant had conformed with those improvement guarantees. Exhibit A in the conditions of approval also make that point throughout. Is the plan to let Heather Glen build out the rest of the properties and sell and transfer the titles before requiring the street to be improved? At that point, the city would have absolutely no guarantee that the improvement would occur.
30 seconds.
It also says the city recommendation that the developer is anxious to initiate the work once the city starts once the city initiates the work. So please clarify that statement. And as a former planning commissioner, I was disappointed to read the 5/9/2022 packet. No construction deferral agreement, no contractual guarantee, no $191,263 financial guarantee, no affidavit confirming that the applicant had complied, and then no complete construction drawings.
Thank you very
No
much.
sidewalks. Thank you. It's hard to do this in 3 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. And then next we have Ms. Knudsen.
So before I talk about 11th Street, I briefly wanted to mention that it's ironic that we're discussing housing and housing goals for Philomath at this meeting in affordable housing. Our per bedroom cost for our triplexes are $450 a bedroom. The Boulevard down the street for a similar sized unit is $732 a bedroom. We provide affordable rental units for people that make about $54,000 a year. So we feel a huge need for Philomath. Yet, I would discourage anyone who wanted to invest or improve their property not to buy in Philomath. We've been treated in a manner that is not consistent with Oregon law, that is arbitrary and abusive. I'm deeply offended that Mr. Workman would presume to know our intentions, as he refers to in his recommendation this evening. We have always expected to be assessed if an LID was ever formed in a way that was congruent with Oregon law. That is, equally and proportionally to the benefit of the property. That's exactly what an LID assessment is according to the law. It also has to move through the proper process. We are individual property owners. We share the same legal rights as the property owners on the street. We entered into the non-remonstrance agreements the city required with the understanding we would be assessed in accordance with this law equally and proportionally. You cannot, in accordance with the law, exclude property owners or single them out for sharing in the same funds, SDCs or grant money as others. We fully understood this, and it was Mr. Workman's job to understand it as well. Don't make it impossible to build middle housing in Philomath in a way that makes sense, let alone a single person who wants to make an improvement to their current property, such as a bathroom or a remodel. The city needs to evaluate closely the way they are carrying out the code for improvements. We received legal counsel earlier today that option 3 is not in accordance with the Philomath City Municipal Code. I urge you to proceed with caution and not let politics and agendas rule the day and do what is right. We are providing exactly what Philomath needs, affordable housing. We are fair and kind to our tenants. You can ask any one of them. We have endured over 2 years of stress and emotional hardship for investing in Philomath. I urge you to resolve this and let all the people of 11th Street move on with their lives.
Thank you, Ms. Henderson. And then last person I have signed up is Mr. Bushnell. If anyone else is wishing to speak, can also still sign up for the forum. Mr. Bushnell, thank you.
My name is Jason Bushnell, and I live on 560 North 11th. Really, I just wanted to come and say that I'm supportive of the city manager's recommendation on option 2. I appreciate it because this is actually the 3rd time that I've been able to offer my opinion, and I appreciate that for the opportunity to do that. I wanted to also mention that I think it covers a couple of things that finds a good middle ground, and that it states that it has become obvious that the full street improvements are not wanted by the homeowners on 11th, and yet it also covers the need for safety, which was a concern in terms of using the CAMPA funds to have at least one sidewalk to the park. I did make note of one of the earlier meetings when the issue of safety was raised. Since I live literally right next to the park and my driveway borders the park, I've made sure to check every single day as I'm coming and going, just to look in there. And so for whatever for what it's worth, the vast majority of the days that I've come and gone from my home, I've not seen anybody in the park, and I've never seen more than 3 people since we had the meeting in March. So anyway, just for what it's worth, I'm an eyewitness, I guess you could say, because I literally border the park. But again, I'm in favor of the recommendation on option 2. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bushnell. With that, I have no additional public comments, so we will go ahead and move on to our unfinished business. And the first item is the discussion of North 11th Street, a local improvement district. And Chris, do you want to take the lead on that?
Sure. So the staff report, or the agenda item summary, just give a little bit of background. Again, at the last meeting on the, what was it, on the on the 25th of April. 28th, sorry. Well, the 25th was the hearing. And then the 28th was when everything was posted. So on the 28th, we posted documents that were requested from us on the 25th. On the website, City Council wanted to take a look at some more background material, so that was all provided. Received a couple of kind of individual follow-up questions, but I haven't had a good discussion about that, so happy to talk more in detail with any of those documents if council has questions. And then, I do get down to some options for the council kind of at this point. We are outside of the required 60 days for making a decision based on the last hearing that was held in April. And so if there was a desire to move forward with an LID, as was an option at the last planning or the last hearing, we need to schedule another hearing, hold that hearing, and then make that decision within that 60 days. So we're outside of that by just a few days, really 3 days, I think specifically. So if that's council direction wants to go, if that's the direction the council wants to go, we just need to set a hearing date. Option 2, we heard about some of the comments this evening, would be to use the Campo grant money to put the sidewalk in on the west side of the road. The reason for the west side of the road is that the west side of the road sidewalk is separated from the curb. Just the way the street is designed and laid out, the engineer has the street and gutter and curb, and then there's a landscaped area, and then the sidewalk is detached from that. So putting the sidewalk in alone isn't going to mess up things for putting the street in at some future date. The sidewalk can go in, it's been engineered, we know exactly where it's going to go. So there wouldn't be a lot of engineering or construction issues with putting the sidewalk in now on that west side. As opposed to on the east side of the road, it'd be right up against the curb, and it would just make that construction more difficult to match it in the future. So that'd be the recommendation for going on that west side. Plus that's the park, the side that the park is at, which we again heard testimony about. The third option is local improvement district, just looking at that north side of the street. That was talked about briefly before as an option. Didn't seem to be a lot of popularity there, but again, it's just trying to provide options for the council that would take care of, the northern half, which is specific to the city park, which would help the city at least comply our portion of development of that street. Put forward as well as the other residents that are there on that northern half of the street. But again, we'd only want to do that, as I put in there, if we weren't going to do any type of improvement in the southern half of the street anytime in the future. That could be seen as problematic if you're going to do the northern half now, treat residents one way, and then come back 3 or 4 years later, do the southern half and treat those residents differently. That would be a violation of not only the spirit, but the legal letter of the law. So if you do that northern half, we're doing the northern half, and then that's it. There's no intent to do anything with that southern part of 11th Street anytime in the near future. For number 4, it's the motion to abandon the improvements entirely and not do that Campo funding. I don't know for certainty, but I'd have to go back to the Campo TAC and also the Campo policy, see if we get those funds redirected, maybe to 16th Street or to some other project that the city would have in the future. I don't know that they would do a full transfer or not, so that money would just be up in the air as to whether we could use $140,000 or not if we bend all together. Number 5 is interesting. There was mention of it earlier tonight as well. This would be to abandon the local improvement district, still go through with the project, which at this point, the majority of this project is all getting paid for with street city funds and the street STC, the Campo grant. We need to allocate some additional funds there to make it happen, but essentially we would do the entire street, not do the sidewalks. And then we would give the neighbors a 3-year notice that they need to put their own sidewalks in within 3 years. They could put them in themselves. They could form a co-op of some sort, a neighborhood co-op. They could come to the city and ask for a sidewalk-only local improvement district. I mean, there's still a lot of options on how they would do that, but the city would essentially just focus on making the street improvements there, not the sidewalk improvements. And then number 6 is open. Again, open for more information. I can get more information. Happy to provide more insights, more comments where we can. But feel like that's kind of at this point. My recommendation is we look at option 2. I think it's simple. I do think we've heard from the residents up there. They're not interested in those street improvements at this time. Maybe that changes at some point in the future. But there's other projects that the city can spend street STC monies, street fund monies. We've got other projects that we can look at if there's not a desire to do it up on North 11th Street. So that's kind of where I'm looking. Happy to entertain questions or conversation.
Thank you very much. Yeah, and I'll just say that I know that this has been a very circuitous process, and I really appreciate that we have gone through with this process. It's been challenging for the residents and for the counselors, for the city staff. There's been lots of issues with it. So I just want to recognize that, and yeah. But with that, we can open it up to questions or a suggested motion. Councilor Bisco.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to make the motion, and using the recommended motion for option 2, I move the City Council abandon the North 11th Street improvements and use the Campo grant to construct a sidewalk along the west side of the street from Pioneer Street to the existing sidewalk north of the park.
Second.
So we have a motion made by Councilor Bisco and seconded by Councilor Lowe. Any further discussion? I'm sorry, first I wanted to offer you to speak to the motion.
Thank you. So being very involved in this process from when it first arrived at the Public Works Committee, and also as a result then with some of the neighbors, many of the neighbors of North 11th Street, I think just at this time we've spent, give or take, about 15 months on this topic, and a lot of conversation and a lot of deliberation. We've been provided with a pretty healthy record and some pretty significant testimony. And while I don't think that the city has a flawed process, it would appear that whether intended or unintended, that we've had flawed in practice or implementation in this process, leaving the council with a lot of different recommendations. I think this is the first one that really addresses where we are currently at. It might not be the best way to address the infrastructure issues, but it does at least address the situation where we currently sit, which is we don't have a good policy for infrastructure improvement presently established by the council. We have dozens of unimproved streets and sidewalk projects throughout the city. And so this allows us to address some safety issues that have been brought up. This also allows us to acknowledge that approximately $800,000 in general fund dollars might be best reserved in case our downtown streetscapes project is over budget, which is highly probable. It allows a pause to consider perhaps better options for streets like North 11th Street. More specifically, it allows us to direct Heather Glen to complete what requirements exist for them through conditions of approval, which have not presently been met. And that might also give us a more clear path on how to move forward with North 11th Street. So my recommendation, my motion is that we move forward with that option 2. We put some closure from this council to the North 11th Street property owners, and that we also make a commitment to move forward so we just approved this housing policy. And if you look, we didn't talk about it tonight, but if you look at Goal 5, it clearly states identify funding sources to support the development of infrastructure. And it goes on to say enough housing affordability programs. That infrastructure piece is really key for us moving forward. So I think option 2 gives us that opportunity to pause where we need to, move forward with policies that are best practices, and put some closure to this with some safety issues as well in place.
Thank you. And Councilor Lowe.
I have a question for City Manager. So I too support this. I think it's an equitable way to handle it, and we've certainly heard from the residents, and I hope that they know that we've heard them, and this is a good outcome, even though it's taken a long time. But a question about the Heather Glen subdivision and their obligation still on the street. Can you explain what happens next with that?
Yeah, so if the council goes through with this motion, then I'll notify the owner of Heather Glen that the city is not going to proceed with the local improvement district. I can set up a timetable with him on getting that work done. He'll have to start discussions and negotiations on his own with the contractor and all that. So I don't know where he is in those discussions, if he's already done that. My impression is he's been waiting for the city to get a contractor on board and was going to then enter into discussions with that contractor to do his work while the contractor was there doing the city work. So I would presume that he's not taking any of those steps at this point. So he may need a little bit of time. My mind is he'd have a year, get documents in place, get ready, go out for bid, and be ready to go out in the spring for construction. So I'm thinking another 12-month kind of time frame, but I might run that by Mr. Brewer and kind of see what's an appropriate and a logical thing. That seems to make sense to me that within 12 months we want him to get his things done.
And he's open to doing that. I mean, it seems that he wants to fulfill his obligation.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I don't want to put words in people's mouths and get in trouble for doing that too much. I guess already.
I have a question about that. And so not all the homes have been constructed in that subdivision yet, correct? And so would there be, could we use that as leverage to make sure that it gets done?
Possibly.
Would we want to? I don't know.
I don't know that we'd need to. I've never had any. I've never had any hesitation from Mr. Dow that he intends to get that street done. He's been waiting for the city.
Okay. Councilor Causey.
I just wanted to state that I will not be supporting the motion because I believe it's important to get this project done. I think we have the money to do it, and I'd like to see the full street improved. I would support suggestion number 5 to abandon the LID, but proceed with the improvements. I think that would be a better outcome for the community and the city as a whole than to have the sidewalk on one side of the street. I live in a neighborhood that has a sidewalk on one side of the street, and all it does is encourage me to walk in the street. So I don't think that's a good solution, and I think option 5 would allow this street to be upgraded. We do have, Councilor Bisco is correct, we do have numerous streets that need to be upgraded, and we do need additional financial resources for infrastructure improvements, but it will be years before we get those. I would say at least 2. And we have the money now to do this project. It's not going to get any cheaper.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Any additional comments, questions, thoughts, Chris?
Just add to Councilor Causey, and I didn't go into a lot of detail on this, but we did approve a budget that does have funding to do option 5. So that is financially feasible. We have funds to it. The money that we were going to collect from the LID was all going towards construction of the sidewalks. If we're not doing the sidewalks, then we'll have sufficient money to do everything less the sidewalks. So that is financially doable.
May I ask a question? Would option 5 also make Mr. Dowd the incumbent? Would that he would be responsible for his still full cost of his what he is allowed?
Yeah,
He would still,
Dowd's property is not part of the local improvement district. That was removed last time around. So yeah, we would still work with them on a time frame. Again, if the city was going to proceed, I think his expectation would be he would continue to wait until see who we got on board for the city and then negotiate with them. So I don't think that time frame for Mr. Dowd's improvements would change any if the city were to move forward.
but you would see that he would still be responsible for all those costs.
Yes.
Thank you. And Councilor Bisco?
I just want to thank Councilor Causey and Chris for acknowledging that we have set aside the funds for this, but I don't think when we set aside those funds that we had a clear picture, nor do I think we have a clear picture now of what the downtown streetscapes cost will be. If we look at ODOT and even state agency conversations, all contracting is coming in at considerably higher than expected. So if we even take a very conservative 20% on a $16 million project, that's a sizable chunk of money for the city. My question is there any reason we could not, so last I read, we're looking at going out to bid in July, is that correct, for the downtown streetscapes? Is that still the schedule?
Yeah, so the timing's a good question. So the downtown streetscapes will go out for bid and we'll know, end of July, first part of August. even if we went with option 5, we wouldn't be doing that till next summer. So we wouldn't be going out to bid for this project until, January, February of next year. It'd just be setting expectations with Mr. Dowd, setting expectations with the neighborhood. So when we would still, it'd still be this budget year's dollars, right? So it's still this fiscal year, even if we're starting in, May or June of next year. We'll know more then. And so again, it may be, maybe it's option 7 here, is maybe we shelve it, we just table it and don't make a final decision. I think there's a little unrest for Mr. Dowd and from the neighborhood on what the decision is going to be. And so I think, you kind of want to give some guidelines on which direction the city's going. Either we make the improvements to 11th Street because they're important, or we make the sidewalk improvements to 11th Street and we're basically not going to come back to 11th Street for some time in the future, and it'll just stay on the list of unimproved streets that the city has that we're going to get to someday. And maybe we figure out a better way to finance these things. Right now, 11th Street is going to be street funds, SDCs, the Campo grant. That's what's paying for the construction on 11th Street. And then the sidewalks were going to be paid for the essential cost of the sidewalks would be pitched in with the local improvement district, with the neighbors. But the street itself has been large part getting funded by the city, and then the northern part would be by the Mr. Dowd, and then the city does have another portion in front of the park that we will be responsible for a 3/4 road improvement as well that we will need to tack on, but that won't be overly, won't be a lot of money, but it'll be some. So, my preference would still be that we give some direction tonight, either, pick option 2 or pick option 5 or whatever the council wants to do, but we could wait and see. You could make a decision, you could change your mind based on, if there is a large overage on the streetscape project budget and the council with new information and better information decides, for example, we said yes to 11th Street next year, but now that streetscapes has come in and it's $500,000 more and ODOT's wanting us to come up with that extra $200,000, $300,000, we're going to go ahead and use that money and we're going to forego 11th Street some other time. So you can make a different decision later, but I'd still encourage a decision tonight. I think that the neighborhood and Mr. Dowd would appreciate that.
Could I finish my comment? I wasn't finished. That was a question in between. So the Campo grant is allocated to this, and we could dedicate it towards the sidewalk as it sounds. Is there anything preventing us from moving forward with option 2 and then getting all the information and feedback from ODOT and the bids on that project? Because I'd hate for us to have to decide that, no, we don't have enough money or we have to figure it all out contingent on a decision tonight. If it looks great and the ODOT project is going to go ahead fine and we've got the dollars allocated, could we come back and form that LID option number 5's version? Because Campo money is going to be spent on this project either way. Is there any risk that you see in doing that? So 2 separate decisions, but contingent on what our downtown streetscapes budget is expected to be.
So first, your question essentially is, can we do option 2, do the sidewalk now and still come back and make a decision about the rest of the street improvement later? Yeah, I don't think it's going to hurt the project any. Again, I think it just leaves uncertainty in the minds of the owners on 11th Street, including Mr. Dowd, and I would include the city for our portion as well. It leaves that doubt there of what's going to happen. But construction-wise, yes, I mean, maybe you're paying a little bit more in cost because you've got a smaller segment sidewalk to do as opposed to in a large project where somebody's already there, but that's going to be minimal. My bigger concern is the bigger variant really in all of this is what are construction costs going to do between now and next summer? And I don't have that crystal ball. I don't think anybody does.
They'll go up.
Thank you.
Well, in either way, that $800,000 expenditure here still has that piece of how are we going to duplicate that for the next street?
Yeah.
And we haven't really addressed that either.
And so, Councilor Lilly, I know you had your hand up a few minutes ago, but.
Well, yeah, I'm still sticking with option 2. One of the things that I don't like about option 5, and this goes back a ways, is that we're using an awful lot of city money to subsidize that particular street. And what does that say about future streets? So just in principle, I don't like that. And I think also it lets so the residents, I understand option 5, the residents don't put any money into this. It's all city money that's already been paid by other people and grants, whatever. I don't think that's fair. in the spirit, so I'm gonna stick with 2.
Thank you. And Councilor Council.
Just to clarify, in option 5, the residents would pay for their own sidewalks.
Yeah, but that's all.
Okay. Okay, that's what they would normally pay,
No, the way we kind of,
absent any lighting.
Okay.
I just wanted to clarify, regardless of whether it's option 2 or option 5, neither would start till next summer. Is that true?
The sidewalks, Kevin had killed me for saying, the sidewalks we may be able to do like end of, late this year still. But I don't know. The engineering's been done. It'd just be a matter of getting a bid together and going out and then seeing what costs come in at. But again, it's that crystal ball. Is our concrete costs gonna go down by this time next year? Are they gonna stay up? They're gonna, where are we gonna be? So, but timing wise, cost outside, timing wise, we could probably still get the sidewalks in, before end of summer, end of fall.
Thank you. And Councilor Andrade?
Just to clarify, so besides the safety concerns regarding the lack of sidewalks and that may or may not be that big of an issue, what is the primary reason for improving that street? Is it really for upgrading the sewer pipes and the water pipes, or is there other things that are the main driving force behind why we want to be improving this street now?
The primary concern all along has been the street and the safety of the street. The water line and the sewer line and the storm line, those all kind of follow, but the main impetus has been the city put a new park in place that wasn't there before.
Mm-hmm.
There was several developments on the east side of the road, several triplexes that got built. There's a subdivision that emptied out on the street, and all those things were happening within that same 2-year frame. And so it was about increased traffic on the road, and rather than requiring each individual property owner to do those 3/4 road improvements, that we just pool together and do it all at one time as one project for some cost savings. That was the intent.
Thank you for the reminder. I definitely am a little curious still about those safety issues that, like we heard tonight, might not necessarily be as big of a concern as it has seemed. I appreciate option 2. It sounds like most of the, if not all of the people who spoke tonight were in favor of option 2. I think that we should be listening to them. And I agree about the whole policy issue. We seem to be running into trouble a lot with acting on things and then later coming back and being like, oops, we didn't have a policy for that, but now we're going to make a policy. And I'd rather us do that now before we make that mistake again.
Thank you. And then I'll just weigh in here before we revisit. But there is no right decision here, right? There's a lot of, every single decision here has requires a balance, and they all have pros and they all have cons. The first child to go out and get hit by a car, all of a sudden now would be a big priority, and there would clearly be a safety issue. Until that happens, we could question whether or not we have a safety issue. But I'm in support of option 2. I'm in support of option 5. I'm in support of option 4. I think that the city residents or the street residents clearly don't have much of an interest in having their street improved. And if we take the funds that we would save by not improving the street, I suspect that there's plenty of other places where we could spend our resources and improve the safety there as well. there's other streets that have children walking on them and people walking their dogs on them. So I see the benefit. I'm disappointed in the idea that I'm really hesitant about putting a sidewalk on the west side of that street, only because it doesn't feel natural for people to walk over on that existing sidewalk coming off of Pioneer. It's so far to the west, it just doesn't feel natural. At least that's my perspective, so I'm somewhat hesitant about that. But I'll support the option to go ahead and abandon the street improvement and put in a sidewalk, but just recognizing that there is no ideal solution here. Councilor Bisco?
Thank you, Mayor. I just have a question about the development of the street and the budget. So back a little bit, back step from your comments. The infrastructure improvements of the water and the sewer lines, is that also budgeted? My recollection is that's $500,000+. Was that part of our budget as well, specific to this project?
It was, yes.
Thank you.
So we have a motion on the table, and it's been seconded, and that is to support option 2, which abandons the street improvements and uses the Campo funds to construct a street along the west side of Pioneer, or from Pioneer to the existing sidewalk north of the park. It looks like we are ready to make a vote on that.
Got one more comment, sorry, I should have I should have divulged this earlier. After talking through this with Public Works Director last week, and I was out today, or to have this conversation earlier, Kevin's fear's opinion is that we would probably have to do, with option 2, with any of these, if we do any work on that west side, we would probably have to address some of the storm line issues on that west side of the road. Again, it's money that's budgeted for the total project, but without looking at it and talking with the engineer in detail, he wasn't sure how much of that sidewalk we could put in without disturbing or needing to make improvements to that storm line as well. So if we're gonna go option 2, maybe that motion's a little bit soft and that it's gonna be installing the sidewalk and any needed storm infrastructure. And again, I'm sorry for the lack of detail there, but without looking at the engineer again on the specific, it wasn't the entirety of the street. It seemed like up by the city's portion of it, and especially down low where the bigger ditches there between that area, it seemed like some storm money would have to go there in order to get the sidewalk where it needs to go. So it wouldn't just be it wouldn't just be sidewalk money from Campo. If we're doing 2, we would have to spend some city stormwater money to put some of that stormwater underground.
Did you get back to us about the details in that project before it goes out to bid, I assume?
Yeah, we would come back with exactly what needed to be done, an engineer's estimate of what that would be. He's never separated out the storm work would need to get done for sidewalk, this wouldn't. We just, he looks at the entire storm system would need to be improved, the entire sidewalk system would have to be improved, and he's just not done that practice or that process of kind of splitting those out of what the minimum amount of storm work that would need to be done for the sidewalk to be installed.
So it doesn't change the motion that's been made at this point?
No, it would just need to be, no, that would be fine. And then I would just come back with, you wanted the sidewalk done, I just don't want to bait and switch. You said sidewalk, but what you really were approving was sidewalk, and by the way, in order to do the sidewalk to the stormwater, so I just want to disclose that now. I just don't know what that number is going to be.
Yeah.
So is it in the budget? Do we have the money? I mean, this is
We budgeted to do all the stormwater improvements.
Okay, so it's there, it's
This
just
would
a
be,
matter of.
we just do a small number, the minimum amount needed in order to address the sidewalk.
Would that hold up getting the sidewalk installed, do you think? I mean, getting supplies and all that stuff.
I mean, it's pipe and all
Yeah.
that, so
That's what I was gonna ask. That was the reason why we
potentially,
couldn't do it
Yeah.
before, was because we didn't have pipe.
Right.
yeah, I don't know if that's study the sewer, this is the storm pipe. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
So I guess either way, if I get some direction, I need to go back to the engineer and have Kevin go back and see what the details would look like. And again, it may impede us doing it this summer, but it may be, we're gonna do sidewalks, may include some stormwater. We're not gonna get to it this year, it'll be next year, but at least now we've given some guidance on what the anticipation is gonna be going forward.
And that capital money is there, even though it may take quite a while to
Do some finagling, but it's, yeah. we should be fine with the capital money if we know what the project is. Well, I'd have to go back and look. There may be some state regulations on how quickly that money had to be spent. I don't remember that being discussed when it was given, because I know some of that money specifically we're gonna do till next year anyway, and it's all the same pot of money, so we would probably be okay, but I'd wanna double check that.
We could use it on other projects and use general funds or street funds, right?
That's why I said we might have to do some swapping.
Yeah. So back to the motion made to support option 2. All in favor, please raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, please raise your hand and say nay.
Nay.
Motion carries 6-1. Thank you for that discussion. So with that, we have a conversation about the neighborhood traffic management plan. If I am not mistaken, I believe that Councilor Nielsen may lead that conversation.
I am, and excitedly so. I came in partway through the actually the tail end of this program being developed, but it is a much needed neighborhood traffic management system that allows for a process of complaints and the process to be stipulated in specifics and consistency on how we will handle complaints on traffic issues in our city. It provides a way to identify specific traffic issues within our city, and how step by step these issues would be addressed by the police department, which is such a helpful piece. That consistency and overall policy is quite important. There's a mitigation strategies as it's listed here, and possible installations of traffic calming devices. As Peggy has mentioned, this is needful. They have a set program and policy in place for our police department is really invaluable. And Ken and the police committee have worked hours in trying to provide the most comprehensive management program possible for our city. And I think it looks pretty good in comparison with what we've seen as policy of other cities. I think it's complete and thorough, and I think it addresses the needs of a city of our size with the manpower and the staffing that we have in our police department. So I hope that we would all agree, and I believe that this is should be considered.
Excellent. And we do have a recommended motion. Councilor Love.
I move to approve the neighborhood traffic management program as presented.
Second.
So we have a motion made by Councilor Lowe and seconded by Councilor Cosby.
We have a question. So in light of Ms. Yoder's testimony, would we be incorporating South 15th Street into this? Or rather, does the policy get approved and then we would bring this to the police committee?
It would be my understanding that the program would be approved, and then Peggy's recommendation for 15th to be considered under the new program as the initial, would that be considered? We're not actually approving the 15th Street, we're approving the program itself.
It does seem that a lot of the points that Peggy enumerates here would fit this, so.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Cosby.
Just a question of clarification. When this process was initially requested, there was an ask that there be a neighborhood committee that was made up of citizens who shared these concerns. And while I think this is a good policy and clearly outlines the process, it seems to overlook that step unless it is intended that the police committee act as that group. And I understand that these complaints don't come in frequently, and there may not be a desire for yet another committee. But my understanding from our initial meetings was that the intention was that this group would meet on an ad hoc basis as needed, perhaps comparable to our tree advisory board, which does not meet very often at all. So I just wanted to request some input on that.
I just wanted to address that, and I have other comments, but.
Yeah,
start, and
when
I'll-
that was discussed at the police committee level, it was talked about a different committee. I think the police committee felt like there may be a few of these come in right at the onset, but then they would be few and far between. The police committee felt like it was something that they could handle and part of their, regular meeting schedule, rather than forming a new committee. But it was a topic discussed, and if the council wanted to go that way, as you mentioned, the tree board, it seems like you could have an additional representative or two that could attend that police committee and that neighborhood traffic safety, neighborhood, whatever our program is, neighborhood traffic management program, could be the police committee +2 or +3 or something like that. That's an option. We just didn't want to, I don't know why it didn't get put in there. I think the discussion was that just let the committee do it. Councilor?
Yeah, my recollection was, and I was on the police committee at the time, that pretty much what you're saying, Chris, is that the police committee would handle that because it was going to be maybe few and far between. And then, as you say, if there was a need for more citizen input, we would, depending on the circumstances, we would do that. And then but our focus was a lot on the traffic management plan. And then it came off the committee, so I don't know.
Councilor Nielsen, did you have anything to add to that?
Oh, I'll listen and I'll respond, sorry.
And Councilor Causey, did you want to add to that conversation?
Actually, it's a separate request.
Yeah.
And I agree, that was a discussion we had as far as how that would be handled. And our police committee meetings are open to having other people attend them, and being as the complainants of recent years are minimal, we thought we could address that through a police committee. But also on a more personal note, as I've contemplated this, after attending the wildfire meeting that we had as far as preventative and preparation, you mentioned the fire watch, and I've been thinking about neighborhood watch and other things. Maybe it's time as a community that we address how we encourage neighborhoods to gather to discuss their needs, whether it be traffic issues or safety issues or wildfire preparation. Maybe there are ways that as a city we can encourage that community involvement and neighborhood involvement, make it more readily available and like maybe even like a pilot program, a neighborhood that could start and show, maybe integrate all of those aspects, the fire watch and the neighborhood watch, if neighborhood watch is needed, or that piece of traffic management as well. Peggy's mentioned in meetings before, if that's okay, Peggy, that she has members that she's talked with before, people that are concerned about traffic issues, and what better way to bind our communities and create an environment of conversations and information and sharing information, that letting neighbors meet and seeing what their individual needs are and getting letting them take some ownership over their own involvement. And I think that could be really helpful even with the neighborhood traffic management program, having a chance to talk about what are you seeing in your neighborhood that might be a concern to you. I love that piece of getting more into the grassroots and letting people have some words, have a voice.
Thank you. And then anybody else?
Councilor Andrade.
Oh, Councilor Andrade.
Thank you, Chris. I really like this program, but there's also a thing that I would like to see in here besides having a couple community members involved, similar to the tree board. And that would be including the council in some way. I don't see the city council mentioned. It might have been mentioned and I missed it, but it doesn't look like the city council is involved in this process at all, besides like, you know, reading the monthly newsletters or whatever. And I think it would be important for us to at least get a report of what's going on. And I would like to know if that was talked about at all in the committee.
Councilor Kazi?
I just wanted to add to that because the one request I wanted to make was that we get an initial report of known problem areas, because I'm sure that 15th Street isn't the only problem area in town.
Right. And can you confirm, Chris or Councilor Nielsen or anyone else, does the city council get a report, you know, saying that they're going to initiate a study, or about the conclusions of the study, the findings?
I would envision that to come with the committee report. I mean, we do that on the agenda every month for the city council meetings. So my expectation would be that if a topic is talked about and it's based on a complaint, then that would be part of that chair's report. When we could specifically require that, but again, I think in good practice, that's what your committee chairs are going to be doing every month anyway, or every, you know, following a meeting. So I don't know. It's how specific you want to be.
Right. And Councilor Andrade, you have a follow-up?
Yeah, thank you. I just think it would be important to at least write it in here, just because the way that it's talked about makes it seem like the police committee is just going to be this autonomous body. And I don't think it should be that. And I don't think that was necessarily the intent, but it does come across that way, at least to me. But also,
would you like to make a motion?
yeah, I don't really know how to do that though. If, is it just making a motion about language added, or do I just say what my intent is and then people come up with language later?
Ideally, you would have the language that you would like, but we might be able to.
I don't know where, the problem also is I don't know where it should go necessarily.
Would you like to think about it for a minute while we go to a couple other questions?
Sure, but I also had something to say to that. Where is it? There was, so on page 3, sorry, there's so many notes on here. Is the step 2 not part of step 1? It says the Philomath Police Department will brief the police committee and the city manager about the traffic safety issue. But isn't that what step 1 is to, you know, like discuss, to log that complaint and review the issue in the context of the transportation system plan? Don't you need all of that information in order to review that? Or is that like 2 different kinds of reports that I'm unaware of?
It looks like Councilor Lowe has an answer to.
Well, I was, as I mentioned, I was on the committee, and at the time that I was on the committee, I was actually pretty involved with this. So hopefully this might help. Yeah, so step 1 was the initial response to the complaint. And then on page 3, as you noted, let's see, there's up at the top, there's a little bit of wording, then there's a bullet, then right after that it says, after the initial response has been completed, and in the case of a speed-related issue, it's determined the measures did not resolve or mitigate the department's concerns, the process would then advance to step 2. So there is a transition from identifying an issue, initial response, and then if it does require mitigation, and it goes to the step 2. And in that, it's not, although it's not specifically stated, it does say that the Philomath Police Department will brief the police committee and city manager about the issues. And that's where I would agree with Chris, that as a council member on a committee, there's something significant, you come back and report to the council. So maybe it needs to be stated more specifically, but I think for me, that was where the tie-in is, where the council would know.
Thank you. And Councilor Visco?
Thank you, Councilor Lowe, for that explanation. That's how I'm reading this also, and that report is occurring under step 2 to the police committee and city manager. I'm curious if that report can, if it's a document that the police committee chair can just move forward or somehow, I mean, the document's going to be created, it appears in step 2 anyhow. And it includes the traffic accident history, so those bullet points, number and type of citation. So it's really data points, as it mentions here. Is there just a way to just include any of those reports in the packet just for reporting purposes?
Chris?
So I think just to keep things simple, see if this suffices. So that, it's really the second paragraph. I've got to put a space between the first paragraph and the second paragraph there. But it starts just above the paragraph just in front of step 2. It says, in keeping with the city's mission statement of responsiveness and public transparency, Philomath Police Department will keep the originator of the complaint, and if we added, and city council, informed of progress towards resolution. So that could be a memo, it could be adding the letter, and again, depending on what these are, it may be nothing, right? It may just be we got a complaint about X, Y, and Z, and we looked at it, and we don't feel like there's any validity. Or it may be, we got a complaint, we got the radar sign out, we'll get back to you in 30 days, so you know an update. So again, I don't want to tie the hands because I want to keep it, to where we can get back to you, but adding it there, and then I would include, if we're going to add it there, then I would say on page 4, the first full paragraph, similar language, a report of the action taken, results of the temporary traffic calming devices or traffic control device or devices, and planned future action should be provided to the originator of the complaint and the city council. So it gives you 2 specific instances where we're going beyond just the committee and we're reporting back to the council on progress made.
I'll make a motion that we modify.
Thank you for that suggestion.
I'll make a motion that we modify those 2 locations.
I'll second it.
So motion made by myself, seconded by Councilor Nielsen. Any further discussion? All in favor, please raise your hand and say aye.
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 Okay, excellent. So we've amended that. Councilor Andrade.
I'd like to make a motion on page 4 to, it's the sentence between page 3 and page 4. So I'd like to change that last sentence on page 3 to, sorry, I don't know how to phrase it because it's on both pages. Let me start that over. I'd like to make a motion that on page 4, the very top of the page, it reads discussion and recommendation to city council. And then this is not the motion part. So more or less it's just saying instead of the police committee making a decision on what to do, they make a recommendation to council. And that's, I think, where I had the impression that it felt like the police committee was trying to, was more or less going to be autonomous as opposed to linking in council.
So it says, for further action to bring to the police committee for discussion and decision. Councilor Nielsen, is the police committee the right place to make decisions about what the final action would be? Is it the police? Do you have a sense for that? Or
I just, I can understand Councilor Andrade's concern about the city council being involved in the management of the police and the traffic management program. In the same instance, there is there has to be a certain amount of trust and confidence in our policing program as well as in the police chief and because although we serve as a city council, the expertise he is hired as our chief, and with the documents that he's gathering, I don't think it would be hurtful necessarily to add a discussion and decision to be based on city council. I don't know how we would make that where it would be palatable for city council instead of feeling autonomous, as Councilor Andrade has said.
So if I may, it's just,
One moment, other people had their hands up. Councilor
but I'm speaking to that specifically.
One moment, Councilor Andrade, please.
Because specifically it says the department
Andrade,
should
you're out of
consult
order.
with the city
Councilor
manager,
Andrade,
and therefore it should.
Councilor Andrade, you're out of
It's
order.
specific to this. Why are you trying to silence me?
We'll take a minute. We'll take a break.
Oh my gosh.
3 minutes.
It's going for the ceiling again, Chris.
Cameras.
And
That's a drawback.
so,
That must be the home position.
and so, when we took a break, there was a motion that was made that had not been seconded. Do you just want to repeat what that motion was, City Recorder?
Amend the top of page 4 to replace discussion and decision with discussion and recommendation to City Council.
Okay. So add discussion and recommendation to City Council.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, so we have a motion made by Councilor Andrade and seconded by Councilor Bisco. And then we had a comment by Councilor Kazi.
I guess it's both a comment and a question. I guess I'm not sure the city council is the appropriate body to be making this type of decision.
So Mayor, point of order, I'm wondering if we can hear from Councilor Andrade on her speaking to the motion. I'm interested, before we deliberate, if we're even understanding her intent of that motion.
Sure. Councilor Andrade, you want to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Councilor Bisco. I really appreciate that. From what I understand, it is not being interpreted correctly, because if you look at the sentence, it says, if step 2 does not result in the desired outcome, the department, as in the police department, should consult with the city manager on a recommendations for further action to bring to the police committee for discussion and decision. So why can't that also be had here? The police committee isn't any more knowledgeable about the police department than the city council is. That's all I wanted to say.
Great, thank you. And then Chris?
Yeah, I guess my answer would be if you go through step 1 and it doesn't meet the thresholds, and then the police chief talks to me and says, we went through step 1, it doesn't meet any of the criteria for improvements. So at the next police committee meeting, I'm going to recommend that we don't take any further action. I don't know that I feel like that would need to come to the city council. To me, that seems like it would be appropriate to go to the police committee. If the police committee agrees, then we're done. We're not taking any further action. If they disagree, then that's a discussion I think that would be appropriate at the police committee level to come up with some alternative. So I mean, eventually it's coming back to the council, but if you don't allow the police committee to do that level of work, then everything just comes to the city council and we just get rid of the police committee altogether and just have it come right to the city council. So to me, that's a discussion about, here's the process we took. It didn't meet criteria to move forward. Here's the end result. And the police committee saying, we're okay with that or not.
May I speak to that, please?
Actually, there's a bunch of other hands up and they all have valid thoughts and concerns. So I'm going to go to another speaker first.
Even though it's directly about this.
Yes, that's correct. Councilor Kazi, you interrupted a moment ago.
Well, I think I made my point that I don't feel that the council necessarily would be qualified to make this decision. And I wonder how these decisions are made today, because obviously if we're going to install curb extensions, I think in my tenure on the council, I've never been faced with these decisions. So how are they made today?
Right now, it's the complaint comes to staff, typically to police or to public works or to the city manager's office. We'll talk about it amongst ourselves. We've taken it to public works before. We've taken it to police committee before, depending on what it was. If it's signage, sometimes Kevin and I will approve signage if there's minimal cost and it seems to make sense and seems like a good chance of approving or not. So we've done, temporary parking stuff and, different things like that we've just approved. We just don't get a lot of these complaints. So it's hard to say what's our policy when it's like, well, we had a complaint a couple of years ago and this is what we did. We just don't do a lot of them.
Thank you. And then Councilor Lemon.
Yeah, so it seems like this is the last step in the process. So hopefully it gets solved in 1. If it doesn't, it goes to 2. Hopefully that addresses the issue. I just have a hard time wrapping my head around the idea that the police committee, which I'm on, and the chief are going to determine that we need to put a traffic circle somewhere without involving all of staff and the city council. So why shouldn't we just say, and the city council? And it's only step 3. It's not like you mentioned, oh, we decided not to do anything. Does that warrant a full report to the city council? No, but in step 3, if you decide you want to put in a traffic circle, I think that does warrant coming to the city council.
And Councilor Nielsen, you have your hand up.
Well, I think maybe that word decision is a hard one for us to swallow when we think that, as Matt was mentioning, as Commissioner Lima was mentioning about, should a police committee make a decision on things like this, the bullet points that are listed on this report. But so perhaps like instead of discussion and decision, we could put discussion and consideration. So that then, as it lists here, report of action taken, and then this last sentence in the paragraph before the bold line where it says definitions, the police committee should revisit the original complaint and discuss the current status of the traffic concern no less than 1 year. So there is a place for us to consider and revisit the original complaint and review what has been done. So, I can see Councilor Lehman's piece about, these things being a city council involved process, but in the same way, the experts in this field, I think, are that for a reason, and we hire them and trust them to use their judgment and their expertise. And it isn't just simply that we also have the ODOT engineers and other resources for additional recommendations. So we are putting stipulations on what other considerations we are making on this. I think we have to make it workable.
And then I'll just add one quick comment that it seems like there's certain decisions that we wouldn't want the city council to be making, like the idea of maybe the police chief might recommend putting up a speed limit sign or something. But there's other things like, oh, we need a new crosswalk or a new median island that clearly we're not, the police chief isn't going to make the decision, nor is the city manager. So there's these varying steps of comment. But first, Councilor Bisco.
So there's several different opinions here. My concern is that first of all, the police committee is not experts in policing. We have a chief that is an expert in policing. So recommendations that come to the police committee are for consideration. But the language as it is written here is specifically in step 3, is literally, like Councilor Lehman has mentioned, it's got recommendations that no committee should be making decisions on. There are budget implications in these discussions. Let's play this out. So we've got 2 within the last year and a half or so, 2 traffic management issues. We had the tragic loss of life on Main Street. I don't think that any decision that was around that discussion, and when we look at traffic management, should ever be decided by the police committee and not the city council. So I don't know if we leave the words as they are written right here, where would that afford that opportunity for the council to weigh in? And certainly they should. North 9th Street has been an ongoing concern of traffic and safety risk for children in particular, but also the intersection of Pioneer, I think it is, and North 9th. That too is a decision that probably doesn't stop. If we trust the recommendation that comes to the council, it is the duty of the council to make that decision. It's not the duty of the police chief. So simple language change to a discussion and recommendation of the council allows the council to be not only informed so that we can engage with the public when they engage with us on these issues, but it's also just a simple step where the police chief, who is the expert, is making this recommendation. The police committee is aware. The council is having that opportunity to weigh in. when we look at these budgeted bullet points, which they certainly are, or any mitigations that we might propose for either North 9th Street or Main Street, they also would have budget implications. So it's a simple language change that doesn't dilute the trust that we hold in our police chief or the responsibility of the police committee members of the council. But it does make the full council aware of the safety conversations happening in the city. And it falls right in line with this. And as Councilor Lehman said, it's the step 3 process. So we're not getting involved until that very last step of where we may be talking about funding and or other issues.
Thank you. And the quick question is, step 3, all answers to step 3 basically some sort of infrastructure change? I mean, are we to that point when we're to step 3?
Yeah, I mean, if it's a reduction of speed, that's probably not so much infrastructure, it is a speed, you know, you're gonna put new signage up, but it's gonna be a little bit bigger than just that. But yeah, it's gonna be something substantial. You know, it's gonna be outside of the budget, it's gonna be outside of normal traffic patterns. So no, it'll be something substantial. That's gonna come back to the city council, as we've already identified here.
In that case, I think, I would be in support of this motion if it's something that involves infrastructure and not just, I'm gonna put more police on this. I would be in support. Councilor Andrade, you were next in line.
I thank you, Councilor Lehman and Bisco. You said everything I wanted to say.
Thank you. And Councilor Lowe?
I just spaced it. It wasn't important.
I was just gonna comment on the budgetary things, like obviously speed bumps or whatever can probably be covered without having to make any amendments to the budget. But if we're talking about changing the course of a roadway or things like that, obviously that's gonna go into the capital improvement plan. So.
Yeah.
Oh.
Go ahead, Councilor Lowe.
I just remembered. So I think again, on the committee, it was like when we got to step 3, it was like, okay, everything else has failed, now what do we do? So it is a big picture thing. So everything that you're saying I agree with.
Yeah. Okay. So all in favor of making the motion as stated?
Could you repeat the motion, please?
Yeah. City Recorder?
Amend page 4 to replace discussion and decision with discussion and recommendation to city council.
Okay. All in favor of making the motion, or passing the motion as stated, please raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries unanimously. Any further discussion on the policy? With that, we already have a motion on the table to pass the motion to move this forward. And now we can just vote on the amended motion. All in favor, please raise your hand and say aye. 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 Motion carried unanimously. With that, we are going to move on to Ordinance 865, and I believe that the city attorney is anxiously awaiting a first reading.
I have a stupid job, but it's what I'm gonna do. This is ordinance number 865, an ordinance of the city of Philomath, amending Philomath Municipal Code, Chapter 3.30, Transient Lodging Tax, by changing the definition of tax administrator. I would say there are 2 typos in the body of the ordinance. One is a pretty simple one. It's there, the I and the E are reversed, and city should be capitalized on the second line, 3rd word. But if you would do approval with those amendments, the Scribner's errors, I think that would be appropriate.
Yeah, we're spelled correctly.
I remember looking that up, and I think it's okay.
Okay. So we have a couple Scribner errors that have been corrected. Any questions, comments, concerns about the ordinance? Seeing none, we're going to first have a roll call vote.
David Lowe,
Yes.
Teresa Nielsen,
Yes.
Jessica Andrade,
Yes.
Catherine Bisco,
Yes.
Ruth Causey,
Yes.
Matt Lehman,
Yes.
Charles Jones.
Yes. Excellent. Well, thank you very much for all of that. Really appreciate y'all being here. But with that, we are now adjourned.
No staff reports.